During the Revolutionary War, the future United States had already begun acts of foreign policy. The American rebels received French foreign aid in the Revolutionary War. The French offered the Americans a treaty of alliance in 1778. In 1783, with the Treaty of Paris, Britain officially recognized the United States as an independent nation. In the same treaty, Britain conceded a generous amount of territory to the United States, hoping that the Americans would side with them in the ongoing conflicts between Britain and France. With promises made to both France and Britain, Americans as a whole were unsure about who to support, and opinions varied with political beliefs. In 1793, the United States government issued the Neutrality Proclamation, stating the country's neutral position in the ongoing wars between France and Britain. In George Washington's farewell address in 1793, President Washington warned against the United States entering permanent alliances with foreign nations. In 1797, the French began seizing American merchant ships due to their anger about Jay's Treaty, which they thought was a step towards an American alliance with Britain. President John Adams sent 3 envoys to Paris to speak to the French Prime Minister about the merchant ship issue. When the envoys reached Paris, 3 go-betweens referred to as X, Y, and Z demanded $250,000 in order to allow the envoys to speak to the French Prime Minister. This XYZ affair lost many Americans' trust and support for France and led to some naval battles in the West Indies. American relations with the French were restored when Napoleon Bonaparte sold the U.S. Louisiana and the Louisiana Purchase. Still, the United States chose to remain neutral in the French and Britain wars. With the Embargo Act of 1807 and later the Non-Intercourse Act, which reopened trade with all of the nations of the world except for Britain and France. In 1810, President Madison agreed to reopen trade with France, causing the War of 1812 with Britain. After the war ended with the Treaty of Ghent in 1814, Britain and the United States signed the Reche-Baguette Treaty in 1817, agreeing to limit armaments in the Great Lakes. In 1823, the United States introduced the Monroe Doctrine, which stated that any efforts of the European nations to further colonize or intervene in North or South America would be viewed as an act of aggression against the United States, and they would require American intervention. In the mid-1800s, Americans strongly believed in manifest destiny. Yet in order to claim territories like California, the United States would have to fight Mexico for them in the Mexican-American War. In 1848, the war ended with the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. 5 years later, the United States made the Gadsden Purchase, in which it bought another chunk of land from Mexico for $10 million. On this tract of land in the Southwest, the United States planned to place the Southern Pacific Railroad, which was completed in 1865. In the late 1840s, the United States had the first plans to build a canal across the Isthmus of Central America. Americans avoided conflict with Britain by signing the Clayton-Bueller Treaty, which stated that neither the U.S. nor Britain would hold exclusive control over this waterway. Also, in the 1840s and 1850s, American diplomats were first sent to Asia. Caleb Cushing opened trade with China in 1844, while Commodore Matthew Perry opened trade with Japan in 1853. The 1890s witnessed the closing of the American frontier. In the Frontier Thesis, Frederick Jackson Turner wrote that the character and history of America had been defined by the colonization of the West. In this new age, the United States would have to turn to imperialism in order to expand its power and ideals. Many Americans and Europeans viewed imperialism as a way to help backwards and underprivileged peoples of the world. This belief was known as the white man's burden and was exemplified in Rudyard Kipling's poem of the same name and in evangelist religious works like Josiah String's Our Country. Believing Alfred Thayer Mann's view that a large navy and control of the seas were keys to the world dominance, the United States annexed Hawaii in 1898 and participated in jingoistic wars to gain other island territories. The U.S. fought for Cuba in the Spanish-American War, proclaiming that the Teller Amendment that once the island was free from Spanish misrule, the Cubans would be given their freedom. After the American victory, the U.S. forced the Cubans to sign the Platt Amendment, which stated that Cubans would not sign foreign treaties that might limit their independence, and that the U.S. could have control of Guantanamo Bay. The United States also fought Spain for control over the Philippines, yet once they had become a U.S. territory, Filipino Emilio Aguinaldo seized control of the islands. In 1903, President Theodore Roosevelt asked Colombia for permission to build a canal. The Colombian government refused, but the Panamanian people, supporting the United States, rebelled and formed the Nation of Panama, which allowed the canal to be built. The Taft administration used dollar diplomacy to boost American interests abroad by guaranteeing loans to foreign nations. The United States decided to enter World War I to assert its position as a world power. After the war ended, Americans were tired of the jingoism that they had participated in and decided to have a more isolationist foreign policy. Diplomat Henry Cabot Lodge refused to allow the President Wilson to sign the Treaty of Versailles and join the League of Nations. Lodge disapproved of the treaty because Article 10 implied that if any member of the League of Nations went to war, it could pull the other members into war with it. The United States did not want to become involved in any other wars and remained isolationist throughout the 1920s and 1930s. In 1922, the United States passed the extremely high Fording-McCumber tariff in an act of economic isolationism. In 1928, it signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact with 14 other nations agreeing to outlaw war. Unfortunately, the Kellogg-Briand Pact was not successful and World War II broke out in 1939. The United States did all it could to help the belligerents while officially remaining neutral. In the Destroyers for Bases deal, the United States transferred 50 old destroyer ships to Great Britain in return for defensive bases. In the cash and carry deal, the United States agreed to allow Allied powers to borrow war materials only if they could pay for them in cash and transport them from the U.S. themselves. In the Lend-Lease deal, the U.S. sent money and weapons to the Allies if they agreed to pay back the U.S. after the war. The United States may have remained isolationist for a much longer period of time if the Japanese had not bombed Pearl Harbor, causing American entry into World War II. During World War II, the United States was allied with Great Britain and the Soviet Union. The leaders of the three nations met at several conferences, including the Tehran and Potsdam, to discuss war strategy. At the Yalta Conference, near the war's end, the Big Three mapped out post-war Europe. In April of 1945, the United States hosted a conference to establish a new international peacekeeping organization, which it hoped would be more effective than the League of Nations. The United Nations, in contrast to its predecessors, allowed Big Five powers, the U.S., Britain, the USSR, France, and China, to have veto power, making the organization much more realistic. After the end of World War II, competition emerged between former allies, the Democratic United States, and Communist Soviet Union. During this Cold War, the United States made many treaties and alliance organizations with foreign nations. The Truman Doctrine provided aid to the nations of Greece and Turkey, which Americans believed were threatened by communism. In 1948, the United States set up the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, as an alliance for free nations, combating communism. The organization would practice collective security and view attacks on one of its members as an attack on all members. The United States also helped establish organizations similar to NATO to stop communism's spread in other parts of the world. These included the Central Treaty Organization, or CENTO, in the Middle East, and the Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, or CETO, when Americans felt Middle Eastern countries were threatened by communism. Congress approved the Eisenhower Doctrine providing aid to these countries. The Nixon administration led the United States into an era of détente, when it agreed to give the Soviets $750 million in foodstuffs to keep the peace. The Nixon administration also opened up communism in China for trade. In the 1970s, the period of détente between the Soviet Union and the United States was renewed with the Strategic Arms Limitations Talk, or SALT treaties. In 1973, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, or OPEC, was formed and placed an embargo on the U.S. To counterweight OPEC, the U.S. helped form the International Energy Agency. President Jimmy Carter helped create peace in the Middle East by inviting the leaders of Israel and Egypt to Camp David to sign some agreements. Yet also during Carter's administration, Iranians rebelled against its Shah, who was installed by the United States CIA in the 1950s. In this radical Iranian revolution, militant Muslim extremists seized the American embassy, holding its occupants captive in the Iranian hostage crisis. In 1989, the Berlin Wall, separating communist Europe from free Europe, was demolished, symbolizing the end of the Soviet Union as a threat. Even after the fall of the Soviet Union, the United States remains in its Cold War alliances like NATO and continues to practice collective security in NATO and the United Nations.